It's time for another housey skill session, and as usual we're going to take a look at many different things ranging from music theory to synthesis and sound design. For bass and keys we're going to take a look at some drums, but I want to pay some special attention to some advanced processing techniques in this video that can help you to create sounds and character and textures, as well as for mixing things and putting elements in their place and creating separation. That being said, if you like my videos you might also like my samples, so feel free to check out the link in the description leading to my sample shop. But now let's go. Yes, you heard correctly. In this video, we're going to learn from a track called Coloration by Glen Underground. And it has this really weird, broken, quirky piano sound in there, right? So we're going to learn how to get from a piano sound like this to a piano sound like this, with processing, of course. We have a bass sound, which I created from scratch in Diva. So we're going to check that out, as well as some processing for that. We have a pad sound. So we're going to look at the chords and the music theory kind of, but then also at these drums. So yeah, let's actually start with the drums this time, because there's something interesting going on with the clap. And this is just the kick and clap for a second. And this is the clap without processing. So you notice it's a really dry and short 909 clap, just as a comparison again. No processing, processing. So in the original, the clap was really kind of thin, spiky, lots of high frequencies, a bit snappy, and I was looking for similar claps and I wasn't finding any. So I was like, okay, sometimes the solution is to process things in a way that they actually sound the way that you want them to sound. And in this case, the clap is nice up high and thin like that, because it leaves a lot of space for the piano, the bass sound. The mid-range and higher frequencies of those sounds can come through more easily if the clap is like that, which I kind of liked. So what I was trying at first was to kind of transpose up the clap to get like this high stuff, but it sounds a bit lame and gets a bit short, even warped. It didn't work. And you can try also to use EQ to boost high frequencies, but it didn't really work for me. So I ended up using something which I talked about in my last video about chord steps, and that's Formant shifting. Feel free to check that out if you're not sure what Formant shifting is. But there are also tools that can actually help you to shift formants around. And the one that I usually use is by Melda Production. It's this one right here. This is just with the Formant shift. So this is what the clap sounds like. I added a bit of Formant shift, some sharpness, which is kind of a high shelf, but some more things happening. So that's kind of cool. And what you can also hear, some hits, the transients get kind of messed up. You don't have the same spikiness in attack. And it doesn't happen for every hit. Let me know if you can catch this. Like every third one. Almost kind of random, like the last one, the attack is missing. And that kind of breaks the clap, but it's kind of cool also like to have this variation. It didn't bother me in this context, okay? So that was the first step, to kind of shift the sound. And then I used some saturation in here. So Saturn is just a little bit of like making like a lo-fi vibe. Puts it like a tiny bit into place, but then something that I really like is the Abbey Road's saturator. If I want to brighten something up, make it nice and spiky, that's a tool that I like to use. Let's compare that real quick. Compare that. So after I kind of moved the block in a way to get this closer to the sound I like, I got some processing, so some EQ. Some spikiness was a bit too much coming from these tools, and some of that. Then I heard in the original there was some delay on there, like the claps were kind of repeating, but also kind of phasing. So I threw a delay on here. Like you get these quiet ghost notes in there. And what I actually did, I intentionally didn't use a perfect time signature. and actually switched it to a time which is slightly off, and that creates some weirdness and phasiness, and things get slightly out of sync, which can also be cool. Like everything sounds a bit quirky, a bit loose, and doesn't have to be a bad thing. So this is not perfectly on the grid. Almost gets, because there's such a short feedback time, so the delay doesn't repeat that often. It's almost like, because this hit comes slightly late, as if you were adding a bit of swing to the clap, you know? And that's something cool. And then lastly, I needed a bit of a reverb tail, and I used Convology, just like a classic reverb, 480 lexicon, you know, to create that space. Cool. And then at the end of all, you can get a bit more EQ. Some of the highness was over the top, so I EQ'd that out. So that was a clap as an example. I have it in the same track as the kick to kind of distort them together. For the kick, processing wise, I made it shorter. I took out quite some decay. So if the kick is really long, the distortion gets like this weird obnoxious sound, right? But if it's short, you can actually distort it quite a bit and get that sound, right? I actually pulled out the sausage fattener once again, which is a funny tool by Data Life. I have it from back in the day. Sometimes it works wonders. So let's take a look at that in scope. And we can actually look at the waveform and see, okay, the thing gets quite chopped with the clap together. So this is just the kick, this is kick and clap. And for gain staging or for leveling things out, it can make sense to kind of crush these together sometimes, and then later on compress everything together. And this way you don't have a crazy peak coming from these two elements. Okay, that was processing for the kick and clap. Let's jump into these heads. Two things I wanted to talk about here. First of all, EQing the heads. We have this open head right here. And there's quite some dirt in here, which is kind of nice. But this might be a bit much here, so some of this dirt should stay in for this sound, but not too much. So let's put it back to where I had it before. This one is right. Like 200 Hertz gives you some nice dirt and grittiness. Then timing wise for the heads, okay, something that's cool to get some variation and some naturalness is to have a variation of closed heads which sound really similar but still kind of different. So we have this one, and this one. Especially these two, they sound super similar but have some slight different resonances. And if you have these playing together, it sounds like it's one head, but it sounds kind of natural and like there's some variation. So picking similar samples and using them instead of trying to use some modulation to ever slightly change the sound is something quite cool. But then the main thing I want to show here, to add some cool variation, obviously we have some swing. So these hi-hats are not perfectly on the grid and come a bit later. And I actually set these guys up to all to the same choke group. I already talked about choke groups so in some other videos, but just real quick, whenever one of these heads is coming in, the other head is going to get cut off. So it's going to get shorter, right? So let's put this here, for example, even earlier. You see how this one gets short? And then this one is long. The reason this is so cool, if you now make a longer loop and you have some variation in your groove, so let's say we always slightly change the swing of the hi-hat, it's also going to change the length of the open hi-hat. It's not just going to change the timing of the closed head, it's also going to change the length of the open head. And this will make it feel like there's some cool variation going on because the length of this hi-hat changes all the time. So let's go very obvious maybe and put this here and do this a bit like that. This comes earlier and then this in here, and you will notice. Listen to this hit. Kind of gets short, right? And we can make this more obvious. So this is a really cool way to create groovy variations which still stay really tight. Instead of just changing the length of this, like having these guys and hats interplay with each other. So that's kind of cool. That's what I wanted to show about the drums. Let's now actually jump into the piano. And let's maybe just make the chords or talk about the chords real quick, because we can get that out of the way quickly. This kind of nicely sums up what I talked about in my music theory videos, that in house music, sometimes there is not that much music theory going on. So what we have here, if I make this a bit longer to show you, we actually just have a C minor 9 chord. So this builds a C minor 9 in its original form. And then here, we just have an E flat minor 7. Let's do this again. If you have a chord like this and you're unsure, something that's kind of cool in live also is you have the MIDI monitor. Let's get this over here, MIDI effect, MIDI monitor. It will actually show you what chord is being played. So as I said, we have a C minor 9 and then an E flat major 7th, and we're doubling the octave. So this here, the E flat, is just being doubled up here to kind of make it sound a bit cool and dense. Maybe some people out there know more about music theory than me, but I don't see how this would fit into one scale, basically. And we just have these two chords, and if you think in C minor, which this C minor 9 would imply, you wouldn't actually get to these points. So there's no G flat or F sharp in C minor, right? So you would have to borrow from other modes or other scenarios, other things, or you just think of these two chords sound kind of good after each other, and since we just have two chords, it's going to be difficult anyway to kind of think in a traditional music theory sense. So sometimes two chords are just enough and they sound good, and if you think in a key, for example, or you use a scale tool in live that makes you use just one scale, you wouldn't come up with an idea like this. So that's why I usually would recommend, if you're making house music, not to use scale tools and things like that, and just go more by ear, mixed with some experience of things like that. So much about the music theory with these chords. Let's now look at the sound design. So without the chain, it sounded like this, right? That's already kind of cool. So as for the clap, we have the M harmonizer. So this is kind of like shifting the formants without having to record high and pitch it down, or recording low and pitch it up. So this kind of tool, it just helps you shift the formants, and that's something that's kind of immediately turns your sound into this nice quirky thing. Cool. Here I'm going a bit more extreme on the sharpness and the shift, and giving it some wideness as well, which creates a chorus. Then we have Decimord, which is just like emulating an MP60 to create some bit reduction. Just breaks the signal even a bit more. Then we have Convology, which is technically a reverb, but let's listen in solo. If you make the decay very short and use a reverb to blend the signals, all of a sudden it's less like an actual reverb, and it just gives a certain filter to the sound. Kind of like if you put a filter on a picture or something like that, right? You're not really changing the picture or adding a long reverb tail. You're just throwing a mask on there. And that's a cool trick, I would say, that can be helpful for kind of changing the vibe or the style of a sound. Kind of tucks it in a little bit. Added some EQ. Really light, just cutting out some low end, boosting a few frequencies. Some chorus. Chorus is always good. Tile chorus for free. You see it all the time. And then we kind of do the same thing again with a delay. And this is by Safari Pedals, which is also, they have cool pedals and tools like that. Let's listen to that. You see? Without. It doesn't really add a delay or something like this. The time is quite short and it's mixed in a way that it's more the character of this pedal is what I wanted instead of actual delay. So just to repeat that, you can use reverbs and delays and things like that and use them as mixing tools because they have certain character in them. So that's something I wanted to show about the processing, and that's it. And all these tools made the sound quite wide, and the original was kind of broken and tucked in. And if you now bring down the width with a tool like Utility, you can see how it like, you even hear phasing going on. So now it's wide, being tucked in and broken. Okay, before we jump into the bass, let's look at the pad real quick. This just comes from an M1. So we have the same chords in here, right? So this was our C minor 9. And then we have our E flat minor 7. And the sound is kind of funny, like, what's it called? Universe, all right? Like, it has a pad and some weird texture in there. But something, if you want to spice up your pads a little bit, can be cool to add like a little extra melody or some extra notes, which kind of just break the chords, right? So listen to that. Cool. And also here the movement comes from this filter being modulated by this envelope. So this would be straight, but it kind of moves up like this. Just a bit closer. You hear it opening up, which is cool. Okay. So much about the pad. Let's now jump into the bass line. And let's actually start with, instead of checking the sound out, let's go for the music theory once again, because there's some cool stuff in here. So the bass is kind of simple, right? And we're staying on the notes which these two chords that we have kind of give us. So we are on our C, jumping into our E flat. But to connect notes, it's often really nice to make octave jumps. So, for example, you could jump up from the C to a higher C. Or, for example, to go into the E flat, you can jump down from a C to the lower E flat and do this, which is kind of cool. So this is what the bass line is doing here. So C, jumping down, E flat, jumping up to E flat. And here, at the end, to make things a little bit funky, we're just staying like in the notes that, in this case, yes, our C minor scale would have. And you're just kind of filling in some things. Shortly, making sure that these notes are kind of short, and jumping up can be nice by being followed by another note that's kind of low. And for example, here to add some variation, instead of jumping down to the low E flat, we can jump an octave higher to the E flat. All right. let's look at the sound real quick. And for me, this kind of goes hand in hand with some of the processing stuff that we talked about, and something also that I talked about in a prior video. What I did here, I mean, maybe you're not familiar with Diva, so don't be afraid. In reality, we just have two oscillators playing a saw wave, which are then being like covered by a filter envelope. So filter opening up and closing down. And to give it this housey, funky sound, you can actually double the bass sound that you have and play it one octave higher. And you could copy it, for example, if you have a bass sample, but in a synth, you can do that right away. So we have this saw wave playing at this octave, right? And then we have this saw wave playing one octave higher. This would be the bass sound like this. This brings this higher octave in. And then something which I like to do also is R bass, which is kind of just focusing the bass itself. This Moog emulation didn't have enough low end for me, and I added in a little bit of a boost here. Like it's a mix of boosting and saturating this R bass tool, which I like. And I like to throw in this bit reduction afterwards, because this way the boosted signal goes into there and it kind of sounds a little bit different. But let's just compare these two real quick with the processing. Just get sounds a little bit awkward, like unprocessed, a bit weird. This is with. Cool. Cool. Piano. Now, the notes were still long from me showing you the chords, but actually also here quite important was to kind of bring this down quite a bit. So yeah, if I leave anything out which you would like to ask about, let me know in the comments. I usually reply to all of them, or I try to answer any questions. And yeah, I hope you found this nice. I have a little sample shop where I sell some samples. Feel free to check that out. There's actually also a piano sound in there, which is similar to the one that I'm doing or using here. And the link is in the description. As always, thanks for watching and looking forward to see you in the next one.